Berserk Band of the Hawk, the final Berserk game, as of the making of this video, came out in 2016, 12 years after the PS2 game and 17 years after the last time a Berserk game came to the West. Developed by Koei Tecmo, most known for the Warriors games, and if you've seen the previous video I've made on other Berserk games, or if you just happen to know these games, then you know that this is not a bad direction for the series to take. While my experience with Warriors games is rather limited, I have tried some of those games, and they seem to fall in line with this one in terms of gameplay, but I'm here to review a Berserk game over a Warriors series game. So I hope that my lack of understanding of this series doesn't matter much in this review. So starting with the gameplay, this mostly revolves around missions set in an open map and completing objectives that will usually end up being beating up a large horde of enemies. And this can get rather repetitive in this 15-hour game, and having a big majority of the game only being allowed to play as Guts. For reference, there are only 5 story missions where you can pick someone else besides Gut, and I would highly recommend you doing that for some variety. What does help with the repetition is having a solid core gameplay. While it's not deep, it is fun, as much as that word has of value. Guts as a character is fast but heavy. Slaying down tens of enemies at a time really fits the setting of the Berserk series, and you still have your abilities from previous games like the arm cannon and arrows and healing from the elf powder. Which is funny that this ability changed so little in the span of 17 years and developer changes, but also makes sense given that these abilities also exist in the manga to some extent and can be translated easily into a video game context. But the abilities here are a lot more flashy, not only due to the animations that play out, but also the much bigger amount of enemies that it will affect, purely stemming from the type of game that this is. There is also a varied set of combos that you can pull, which are all fairly easy to do, at least for me, who is not very good at pulling off combos in fighting games. This one's felt very doable. But these things that make the game fun and visually engaging also make it repetitive. A special attack animation is nice to look at the first few times, but as the game progresses, it really becomes more of a 5-second rest for your thumb, which when putting into that perspective, it actually doesn't sound like a bad thing. A lot of what I describe of this game may sound negative, and if repetition is something you just can't stomach, then this will definitely not be your cup of tea. But for some reason I found myself enjoying this. It has a setting and a story pushing me through a lot of it more than other Warriors games. Seeing Guts fighting in more modern graphics and finally seeing him fight alongside his teammates, which the previous games did not offer, was a big push to finish this game. And this game covers a huge piece of the Berserk story. It goes from the Golden Age arc, which of any arcs I personally think really fits this type of gameplay, especially given all the medieval inspired wars set in this part of the story. And it covers up to the end of the Hawk of the Millennium Empire arc, which doesn't even feel far from where we are now in the manga. And while this is all very nice, there is one major problem with the story, and that is the cutscenes. The cutscenes were taken from the trilogy of Berserk movies that came out a few years before this game and covers the Golden Age arc. So you can probably already see where the problem lies. Well, everything that isn't part of the Golden Age arc doesn't really get proper cutscenes. So about halfway through the game, it's like the game takes a nosedive in its storytelling ability, which sucks, of course, but there isn't a proper fix. The more obvious option feels either impossible or like a downgrade. Animating the second half of the game would take a huge budget that I'm sure Koei Tecmo did not have. And telling the first half of the story in the same way as the second half would mean those awkward and motionless cutscenes for the whole game, which, in my opinion, would be a downgrade. So, while I won't consider a positive the way that the game story exists in, I do understand why the choice was made to make it that way. Now, something that does not help with the repetitive notion of this game is the difficulty, as this game is for the most part a cakewalk, and it's hard to recommend it for a challenge, as setting the game on hard arguably makes the game easier by getting more XP and better items. For reference, me playing on normal, I already felt very over leveled for the whole game. I can only imagine that problem being exacerbated on a harder difficulty. And then there's the option above that, the berserker difficulty, doesn't feel balanced to be a difficulty you pick from the beginning of the game, but rather something you would switch to later on because you feel like the game is too easy. This extends to the bosses, definitely the most disappointing piece of this game. After the last two games, having big focuses on them, here they are few and far between, and when they are, they're not much different from fighting regular enemies. They're just bigger and with more health. The only fight that had some challenge to it was about halfway through the game at the end of the Golden Age arc, so without spoiling it, you can probably figure out who you're fighting. And in this situation, you're being kneecapped, which is the reason that makes this particular fight challenging, rather than the fight itself being challenging. It's a story reason, it makes sense, but it is sad that that's the most challenging part of the game, leading to me in this 15-hour game to only getting one game over, and it wasn't for dying, but by failing a mission requirement. In this game, will be missions where you have to keep characters alive through the map, so you're constantly moving around defending them by healing them and fighting their attackers off. These can be fun. They're missions that require you being aware of the battle situation and being mobile, which definitely brings out the better part of these warrior games. But in this particular mission, and I can only imagine that the problem is made worse on harder difficulties, is the mission design is pushed to such an extent that it becomes a bit ridiculous, and the strategy ends up becoming just going from character to character to heal them and to give a couple slashes to the enemy to keep them away temporarily. Due to it there being just so many characters to protect at risk of sounding pretentious, it almost like it becomes a parody of itself. Because in some way or another, this is what Berserk Band of the Hawk missions are. You defend, but you also attack. Warriors games, from what I understand, are like playing an RTS through the NPC's perspective, where the strategy is left for the story. So I don't particularly expect some sort of deep mechanical experience from this game, and that's fine. It's like they have their own little subgenre, and that's what they do well. I found myself enjoying this game. I don't know if it makes me want to go and try out more Warriors games, but what is here I mildly enjoyed. And that's kind of where now you the viewer have to decide if this is something you will enjoy if you're looking to play this game. If you already dislike the genre, then well, of course I can't recommend. This is not gonna change your mind. But if you are someone that, like me, felt somewhat indifferent about these games, then the Berserk theme might be what does it for you. This game definitely feels like its own game. It doesn't feel like the third game in a series, especially given that the story starts before and ends after both games that came before it. But gameplay wise, it isn't unreasonable that the endless mobs of the PS2 game could be perceived as warrior-like. So as a spiritual successor, it might be something you can buy into. And hopefully this review was informative enough that you can make that decision of playing it on your own. And as far as I stand, I was mildly entertained, like I said, for what was the end of the Berserk video games. And now we will move on to another medium, hopefully. I'll see you in the next one. Please subscribe and please like, because I'm still on single digits subscribers and it would be nice to change that. Thanks.